Hello, welcome to Unit 5, Lesson 3, Changing Elevation. So just before we begin today's notes, I just want to point out that for time's sake, we're going to kind of be skipping around and not necessarily doing everything. So don't jump ahead, make sure you follow along so you're not doing too much. And you will also have to submit these notes for participation points. If I notice that not everything is filled out to the same matter that I have been filling them out, then you will not receive credit. So please make sure you're following along. You're welcome to pause the video wherever you need to. If I'm moving too fast, then go ahead and pause it. All right, let's take a look at the first activity. So in this activity, it's called That's the Opposite. Obviously, we're going to be looking at things that are opposites. A few days ago, when we first introduced adding and subtracting, we did go over the vocabulary opposite. We defined it as two numbers that are the same number, but their signs are different. So, for example, in question 1a, -5 and 5, these are both opposites, right? -5 and 5 are both opposites. We have a negative and then we have a positive. Now the word rose is what tells us that is a positive 5. In B, it says a climber was 30 feet above sea level. So because it's 30 feet above, tells us that we're going to have a positive 30. And then it also says then she descended 30 feet. So descended 30 feet tells us that we are going to have a -30. So again, those are both opposites. Let's take a look at question 2 and come up with what would be the opposite. So in 2a, it says running 150 east. Now on a map, if you're looking at just a basic map, east is typically going to the right. And anytime you move to the right, that's a positive. So this is going to be a positive 150. The opposite of that would be if we, instead of running to the east, so running 150 feet west. So this would be a -150. So again, we have a positive 150 and a -150. B says jumping down 10 steps. So we have the down. Down is a negative connotation. So that tells us this is -10. So then in turn, the opposite would be jumping up 10 steps. And then we have, again, positive 10, right? We're jumping up, so it switches to positive. So that is a positive 10. So our opposites are -10 and positive 10. Then finally, we have pouring 8 gallons into a fish tank. So if we're pouring into, that means we're adding 8 gallons. So that's a positive 8. The opposite of that, so if you're pouring into the fish tank, the opposite of that would be emptying 8 gallons from the fish tank. So pouring and emptying, those are opposites of each other. Pouring in is the positive 8. Emptying would be the -8. So again, we have positive 8 and -8 are the opposites. So just a few reminders that there are many situations involving changes in quantities where we can represent the opposite actions with the opposite value. So right, the actions in these three that were opposite were running to the west, jumping up, and emptying. And we can represent those with the negative values or the opposite values, which were -150, positive 10, and -8. In this lesson, we're going to look further at other situations that involve the opposite values. All right, let's take a look at the next activity. So this is called cliffs and caves. So number 1 says a mountaineer is climbing up a cliff. She is 400 feet above the ground. If she climbs up, this will be a positive change. If she climbs down, this will be a negative change. So let's go ahead and take a look at the table on the next page. So here we can see that we have that starting elevation of the positive 400 because she started 400 feet above. And then we have a change in elevation. So for the first one, for A, it says starts at 400, she goes up 300, so that's a positive 300. So when I think about what my addition problem is, that's going to be 400 plus 300, which we know is equal to 700. So this is a positive 700 feet. The next one says she started at positive 400 feet again, and this time she went down 150 feet. So instead of it being a positive value, we know this is a negative value. So my addition problem would be 400 plus negative 150. And when I think about what that value is, remember the signs are different. So I know I'm going to subtract the absolute values. 400 minus 150 is 250. And then I always take the sign of what there is more of. So in this case, there are more positives. So this is going to be a positive 250. The next one says she was at positive 400 and then she goes down 400. So again, that's a negative 400. So my addition problem is 400 plus negative 400. And right off the bat, hopefully you guys have noticed these are opposites. And the other day, we learned that whenever you add opposites, it equals 0. So she started at, or she is now at 0 feet as far as above or below sea level. And then the last one is a little bit different, right? This one tells us she starts at 400, but her final elevation is at 50. So for this one, I need to ask myself, 400 plus what is equal to a positive 50? So I need to think about, first of all, is my number going to be negative or positive? And looking at it, I know it's going to be negative because the only way I can get from 400 to 50 is if I go down in value. And that's a negative connotation. So I know I'm going to have to go down 350 feet to get to 50. All right, we're going to go ahead and skip B. I'm not worried about that. And let's go on to question 2. Now, question 2 says a spelunker is down in a cave next to the cliff. If she climbs down deeper into the cave, this will be a negative change. If she climbs up, whether inside the cave or out of the cave and up the cliff, this will be a positive change. So those who don't know what a spelunker is, a spelunker is someone who goes and explores caves and caverns. And typically caves and caverns, they're typically below sea level. It sometimes involves going underwater, but not always. Sometimes your just cave is below sea level, but you don't necessarily go underwater. So looking at this one, it's that same idea, but this time it's telling us we're starting at a negative 200 instead of a positive 400. So when I think about my addition problems, for A, if the spelunker started at negative 200 and went down 150, that's a negative connotation. So I'm going to do negative 200 plus negative 150. In this case, I see the signs are the same, right? They are both negative, negative, negative. And because the signs are the same, I know I'm going to have to add the absolute values. So I'm going to do 200 plus 150, which is 350. And then I also know I have to take the sign of which the problem is dealing with. So this is dealing with negatives. So I'm going to have a negative 350. For B, it says it's starting at negative 200 and goes up 100. So that's a positive connotation, so positive. So I'm going to do negative 200 plus a positive 100. If I follow my rules that we established the other day, these are opposite signs. One's negative, one's positive. So I know I'm going to subtract the absolute values. 200 minus 100 is 100. Then I look to see which one is there more of. Are there more negatives in this case or more positives? And I can see that there's more negatives, so my answer is going to be negative. For C, it says she started at, or the Spelunker started at negative 200 and then went up 200. So again, that's positive. So I have negative 200 plus 200. And hopefully, again, you recognize that these are opposites. And we know whenever we have opposites and you add them, it equals 0. So this time, the Spelunker started at negative 200, went up 200, and ended up at exactly at sea level. For D, it says the Spelunker started at negative 200, again went up, but this time 250. So when I write my addition problem, that's negative 200 plus 250. Again, the signs are different, so I know I have to subtract the absolute values. 250 minus 200 is 50. And then I take the sign of which there is more of. So in this case, there are more positives. So that's a positive 50. Now the last one, notice that we don't know what her change in elevation is. We just know her final elevation was negative 500. So I know I'm going to do negative 200 plus some unknown number, and that equals negative 500. So when I'm reasoning this out, I know she ended lower than what she started. So that means she didn't go up. She must have gone down. So if she started at negative 200, she had to go down an additional 300 feet. So for that one, I would say 300 down. All right, we're going to skip B and take a look at C. So C says, what does the expression negative 75 plus 100 tell us about the Spelunker? And what does the value of the expression tell us? So this is tells us the Spelunker started at 75 feet below sea level she then went up 100 feet. And then the next part says, what does the value? So I need to figure out, well, what is negative 75 plus 100 equal? So I know that the signs are opposites. One's negative, one's positive. So I have to subtract the absolute values. 100 minus 75 is 25. I also know that there are more positives than negatives. So my answer is going to be a positive 25. So since the final elevation was 25 feet, this tells me that she was 25 feet above sea level. She ended at 25 feet above sea level. So a few important reminders. Remember, when you're adding opposites, it always will equal 0. And the same thing, if you know the value is equal to 0, note that you're going to be adding opposites. And you also need to keep in mind that when you're adding, you always take the sign what there's more of. So if the problem has more negatives, that's the sign you're going to take. If the problem has more positives, you're going to take positives instead. All right, let's take a look at the last activity. So for this activity, this is some just not, I don't want to say basic, but they're just no word problems, just straight up computation. You're going to need to go ahead and add these values. So what I'd like you to do is pause the video, try to do them on your own, see how you do, and then come back and we'll go over it together. All right, so let's take a look at the first one. So the first one shows negative 35 plus, and then in parentheses, 30 plus 5. So if we recall our rules of our order of operation, which are PEMDAS, okay? PEMDAS stands for parentheses, exponents, multiplication and division are grouped together, addition and subtraction are grouped together. So parentheses, that tells me that anytime I have calculations going on inside the parentheses, I'm going to do that first. So when I say calculations, I mean you're going to be adding, subtracting, multiplying, or dividing. If you just have a parentheses with just a single number with a negative sign, that does not count. So in question 1, because I do have parentheses, I have the 30 plus 5. I know I have to do that first. And 30 plus 5 is 35. Notice that when I did this, I brought my unused number down. This is how I expect you to show your work. If you did not show your work this way, erase it and write it down this way. If you do not have your work shown this way, I will not be giving you full credit for the participation points today. I want to see the work shown like this. Next, hopefully you recognize that negative 35 and positive 35 are opposites. So when I add them together, I know it's going to equal 0. Let's take a look at number 2. Now, number 2 is an entire addition problem. There is parentheses, but there's no calculation in the parentheses, right? It's just a single number with a negative sign. I don't do parentheses first. So instead, I look to go, because it's all addition, I look to add whichever numbers will make my calculation easier. And in this case, it kind of makes sense to add negative 0.15 plus negative 0.85 first. And the reason for that is, I will show you that math, and this is called what I call margin work, right? I'm not going to do it underneath the problem. I'm going to do it off to the side. So this problem, because the signs are the same, I know I have to add them together. So 0.85 plus 0.15. And maybe you can do this in your head and you recognize all right away what it was. But if you can't, here's the math off to the side. 5 plus 5 is 10, carry the 1. 8 plus 1 is 10 again, carry the 1. And I end up with 1. So right off the bat, I know this is negative 1, right? And negative 1, again, plus 12.5, I bring down what I have not used. This is fairly easy. This is a lot easier to do in our heads. We don't necessarily need to show this work because in this case, since the signs are opposite of each other, I'm just subtracting the absolute values. And 12.5 minus 1 is 11.5. I can quickly do that math. I asked myself, what sign do I take? So in this case, because there are more positives, my answer is going to be positive. Last but not least, 1/2 plus 3/4. Just a reminder, in order to add fractions, you do need common denominators, or you need to change them into decimals. So it's really up to you what you prefer to do. I'm going to show you both ways just so you have you can see it both ways, but you don't need to copy them both down, just one of them. So let's do decimals first. 1/2 as a decimal is 0.5. 3/4 as a decimal is negative 0.75. Now again, we have parentheses, but again, there's no calculations in this parentheses, right? It's just a number with a negative sign. From here, I don't need to do this off to the side because I'm going to relate it back to money, right? I'm going to relate it to if I had 50 cents and if I had 75 cents. The signs are opposite, so I know I have to subtract. So if I had 75 cents and I subtract 50 cents, that leaves me with 25 cents. And then also, because there are more negatives in this case, this is going to be negative 0.25. The other way is if you wanted to do fractions. So 1/2, if I made my denominator a 4, that would be 2/4. So I have 2/4 plus -3/4. Again, the signs are opposite, so I'm going to subtract them. 3/4 minus 2/4 is 1/4. There are more negatives, so my answer would be negative. So either way is acceptable. It does not matter which one, but you should not be using calculators for these math problems because they are fairly basic. So again, some reminders from this activity. To add two numbers with the same side, we add their absolute values and then keep the side. To add two numbers with different signs, we subtract their absolute values and use the sign of the number with which there are more of. And then also remember, when we add opposites, the sum is always 0. This is called additive inverse. So let's write that one last thing down. Additive inverse is basically saying when you add opposites, it equals 0. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to submit your notes. Take a picture in Notability. You're not going to be able to just submit a plain picture, so submit it through Notability. Make sure that before you submit it, I can see the pictures clearly and that they're the size of your iPad screen. If I cannot read them clearly, you will have to resubmit. Also, you do have a practice worksheet that you will have to complete for homework tonight. Make sure you use these notes to help guide you. Thanks for watching, guys.